In the cold, unforgiving waters of the South Atlantic, far from the political centers of power in the eyes of the world, a confrontation was unfolding that few believed would rewrite modern naval warfare. It was 1982, and the Falklands War had erupted into a full-scale conflict between Argentina and the United Kingdom. What began as a territorial dispute over a remote group of windswept islands soon escalated into a deadly test of military doctrine, technology, and human courage. At the heart of this confrontation was an unexpected weapon, small, aging, and seemingly outmatched, the A-4 Skyhawk. Yet these aircraft would soon carry out raids so daring, so relentless, that they would shock one of the most powerful navies in the world, the British Royal Navy. The British task force sailed south with confidence. It was, on paper, an overwhelming display of naval power. Aircraft carriers HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible formed the core of the fleet, supported by destroyers, frigates, nuclear submarines, and cutting-edge air defense systems. The Royal Navy had trained for decades to fight the Soviet Union in the North Atlantic, and many believed that Argentina, a nation with limited resources and aging equipment, stood little chance against such a force. The Falklands, it was assumed, would be retaken swiftly. But war has a way of punishing assumptions. Argentina, fully aware of its disadvantages at sea, placed its hopes in the air. The Argentine Navy and Air Force prepared for a desperate defense, knowing that their survival depended on stopping the British fleet before it could establish air superiority in land-ground forces. Among their aircraft was the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk, a light attack jet designed in the 1950s. By modern standards, it was obsolete. It lacked advanced radar, sophisticated electronic countermeasures, and long-range missiles. Yet it possessed something far more dangerous: simplicity, reliability, and pilots willing to fly it to the very edge of death. The A-4 Skyhawk was never meant to fight a modern navy. It was small, slow compared to supersonic jets, and vulnerable to surface-to-air missiles and interceptor aircraft. But its small size also made it hard to detect, especially when flying low over the ocean. Argentine pilots exploited this advantage mercilessly. Flying at wave-top height, sometimes just meters above the sea, they avoided British radar until the final moments of their attack runs. By the time alarms sounded aboard British ships, the Skyhawks were already diving toward their targets. These missions were not just dangerous, they were nearly suicidal. Argentine pilots often flew without adequate navigation systems, refueling in mid-air under extreme conditions, and attacking heavily defended ships with limited weaponry. Many of the bombs they carried were old, designed for land targets, and required precise delivery to function correctly. There was no margin for error. One mistake in altitude, timing, or angle could mean the bomb would fail to explode, or the aircraft would be destroyed before reaching its target. Yet day after day, the Skyhawks came. British sailors quickly realized that this war would not be easy. The South Atlantic offered no safe harbor. Harsh weather, freezing seas, and constant alert took a heavy psychological toll. When the first Argentine air attack struck, the reality of the conflict became brutally clear. Sirens wailed, anti-aircraft guns thundered, missiles streaked into the sky, and through it all, the low, fast shapes of A-4 Skyhawks appeared like ghosts over the water. The shock was not merely that the attacks occurred, but that they succeeded. British ships began to take hits. Explosions tore through steel hulls. Fires raged on decks. Men were killed and wounded in seconds. In some cases, bombs penetrated ships but failed to detonate, causing catastrophic damage anyway. Each successful Argentine strike shattered the illusion of invincibility surrounding the Royal Navy. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a sustained, coordinated campaign that forced British commanders to rethink their entire defensive posture. The Skyhawk pilots became legends among their comrades. Many were barely in their 20s. They flew knowing that British Sea Harriers patrolled the skies above, and that advanced missile systems waited below. Some would never return, but their determination did not waver. For them, this was not merely a military operation. It was a fight for national pride, sovereignty, and survival. As the British task force pressed closer to the Falklands, the intensity of the air war increased. Every ship became a target. Every radar contact could mean an incoming attack. The A-4 Skyhawks, once dismissed as outdated relics, had become the most feared weapon in the Argentine arsenal. Their raids forced the British Navy into a constant state of defense, stretching resources and nerves to the breaking point. This was the beginning of a chapter in naval warfare that would be studied for decades, a story where courage challenged technology, where determination overcame limitations, and where a small jet aircraft changed the course of a modern war. The A-4 Skyhawk raids were not just attacks, they were a message. And the British Navy was about to learn just how costly that message would be. The Douglas A-4 Skyhawk was never designed to fight a modern naval task force equipped with guided missiles, radar-controlled guns, and carrier-based interceptors. When it first entered service in the mid-1950s, its mission was simple: deliver bombs accurately in close support of ground forces. Compact, lightweight, and inexpensive, the Skyhawk was valued for its simplicity rather than its sophistication. By 1982, many air forces around the world were already phasing it out. Yet in the hands of Argentine pilots, this aging aircraft would become a weapon of extraordinary impact. What made the A-4 Skyhawk unique was not advanced technology, but intelligent design. Its small airframe produced a minimal radar signature, especially when flying at extremely low altitude. British radar systems, optimized to detect high-altitude threats, struggled to identify Skyhawks skimming just above the ocean surface. At wave-top level, the curvature of the Earth itself worked in the attackers' favor, hiding them until they were dangerously close. This single advantage would prove decisive. The Skyhawk was also incredibly agile. Its lightweight allowed for sharp turns and rapid altitude changes, ideal for attack runs against moving ships. While it lacked afterburners and supersonic speed, it could accelerate quickly at low altitude, making it difficult for ship-based defenses to track and engage. In combat, these characteristics mattered more than raw speed. However, the aircraft's limitations were severe. The A-4 had no onboard radar. Pilots relied on ground control or carrier-based guidance to navigate vast stretches of open ocean. One navigational error could mean running out of fuel hundreds of kilometers from land. To extend their range, Skyhawks depended on mid-air refueling, a complex and dangerous operation made even more challenging by poor weather and enemy threats. Each mission was a calculated gamble. The cockpit of the A-4 Skyhawk was cramped and basic. There were no digital displays, no advanced warning systems, and no automated defenses. Pilots flew using analog gauges, visual references, and instinct. When British missiles locked onto their aircraft, there was often no warning, only sudden explosions or violent evasive maneuvers at the last second. Survival depended entirely on skill, timing, and luck. Weaponry posed another challenge. Argentine Skyhawks carried unguided bombs, many of which were decades old. These bombs required precise delivery conditions to arm correctly. Flying too low or releasing too late could prevent detonation. Ironically, some bombs that struck British ships failed to explode, sparing the vessels from total destruction. Yet even unexploded bombs caused devastating internal damage, flooding compartments, disabling systems, and igniting fires that spread rapidly through the confined spaces of warships. To deliver these weapons effectively, pilots had to approach their targets at extremely low altitude, then pull up slightly at the last moment to release their bombs. This maneuver exposed them to intense anti-aircraft fire. British ships unleashed everything they had: machine guns, cannons, and missiles, creating walls of steel and flame in the sky. Flying into this storm required unimaginable nerve. Training played a critical role. Argentine pilots were highly disciplined and well-trained in low-level attack techniques. Many had practiced flying mere meters above water for years, mastering the art of terrain masking. They understood that altitude meant death. The sea became their shield, and every wave their cover. This training transformed the Skyhawk's weaknesses into strengths. Equally important was the pilot's mindset. They knew the odds were against them. British Sea Harriers dominated the airspace with advanced missiles and superior situational awareness. Once detected, a Skyhawk had little chance of escape, yet pilots volunteered for mission after mission. Their motivation was not blind recklessness, but a powerful sense of duty. For Argentina, the Falklands conflict was a national cause, and these young men believed the fate of the war rested on their shoulders. British intelligence initially underestimated the Skyhawk threat. The aircraft was viewed as outdated and incapable of penetrating modern defenses. This miscalculation proved costly. The Skyhawks did not attack in isolation. They operated in coordinated waves, often alongside other aircraft types, overwhelming British defenses through sheer persistence. Even when losses were heavy, the attacks continued. As the campaign progressed, British commanders adapted. Ships changed formations, air defenses were reorganized, combat air patrols increased, but every adjustment came at a cost, stretching limited resources and exhausting crews. The Skyhawks forced the Royal Navy into a reactive posture, dictating the tempo of engagements rather than responding to them. The A-4 Skyhawk's impact went far beyond physical damage. It shattered assumptions about modern warfare. It demonstrated that courage, tactics, and training could compensate for technological inferiority. It exposed vulnerabilities in naval air defense that planners had not anticipated. And most importantly, it proved that even an aging aircraft, when used with precision and determination, could change the course of a war. As the conflict intensified, the Skyhawk pilots prepared for their most dangerous missions yet. The British fleet was closing in on the Falklands, and the decisive battles were approaching. What happened next would push both sides to their limits and leave a permanent mark on naval history. The first successful A-4 Skyhawk attacks against the British fleet marked a turning point in the Falklands War. Until that moment, the Royal Navy had believed its layered defenses, radar systems, surface-to-air missiles, and carrier-based fighter patrols would prevent serious losses. That confidence was shattered when Argentine pilots broke through and delivered the first blows. These early encounters would reveal just how vulnerable even a modern navy could be when facing determined, low-level attackers. As the British task force approached the Falkland Islands in May 1982, ships operated under constant threat. Radar operators stared endlessly at glowing screens, searching for any sign of incoming aircraft. But the South Atlantic environment worked against them. Sea clutter, weather interference, and the low altitude of Argentine attack aircraft created blind spots. It was within these blind spots that the Skyhawks emerged. One of the earliest shocks came when Argentine aircraft struck British ships operating near the islands. The attacks unfolded rapidly. Skyhawks approached at wave-top height, using the horizon as cover. By the time they were detected, there were only seconds to respond. British ships opened fire immediately, launching missiles and unleashing gunfire in every direction. Tracers filled the sky. Yet through the chaos, some Skyhawks pressed on. The first bombs hit their targets with devastating effect. Explosions ripped through steel decks, tearing open hulls and igniting fires that spread quickly through internal compartments. Even when bombs failed to explode fully, their kinetic energy alone caused severe damage. Pipes burst, electrical systems failed, and ships lost maneuverability. Damage control teams raced against time, fighting fires and flooding, while under the constant threat of renewed attack. For British sailors, the psychological impact was immense. Many had never experienced combat at sea. Suddenly, they were facing high-speed attack aircraft flying directly at them, skimming the water and releasing bombs at point-blank range. There was no time to think, only to react. The realization set in that this was not a distant, controlled operation. It was a brutal, close-range fight for survival. Argentine pilots, meanwhile, faced equally terrifying conditions. As they began their attack runs, they flew directly into intense anti-aircraft fire. Shells exploded around them. Missiles streaked past their wings. The air shook with shock waves. Pilots focused solely on their targets, knowing that hesitation meant death. Many Skyhawks were hit and destroyed during these early raids, their pilots lost to the sea. Yet the attacks did not stop. One of the most significant early losses for the British Navy demonstrated the Skyhawk's destructive potential. A British destroyer was struck during an Argentine air attack, suffering catastrophic damage. The ship was engulfed in flames, and despite heroic efforts by the crew, it eventually sank. This moment sent shock waves through the task force. A modern warship had been lost to low-tech, unguided bombs delivered by aging aircraft. The sinking was more than a tactical loss. It was a strategic and symbolic blow. It proved that British ships were not immune. Commanders now had to confront a harsh reality. Every vessel, no matter how advanced, was at risk. The Skyhawk threat could no longer be dismissed as minor or temporary. It was deadly and persistent. British air defenses, while formidable, were not flawless. Missile systems had limitations, including minimum engagement altitudes and reaction times. The Skyhawks exploited these gaps perfectly. Flying too low for some missiles to track effectively, they forced ships to rely on guns as a last line of defense. These guns, while deadly, required precise aiming under extreme pressure, often against multiple incoming targets. Coordination also played a role. Argentine attacks frequently involved several aircraft approaching from different directions. This divided British attention and overwhelmed defensive systems. Even when one Skyhawk was shot down, others could still reach their targets. The cost was high, but the results were undeniable. As reports of damage and losses reached London, concern grew rapidly. The Falklands operation was no longer a straightforward naval campaign. Questions arose about ship survivability, air defense effectiveness, and overall strategy. British commanders on the scene urgently revised tactics, increasing air patrols and adjusting fleet formations. But each change introduced new challenges, stretching limited resources even further. For Argentina, the early successes were both inspiring and sobering. They proved that the Skyhawks could hurt the British fleet, but they also highlighted the immense losses suffered by the pilots. Every successful strike came at the price of lives and aircraft that could not easily be replaced. Still, the belief grew that persistence might tilt the balance of the war. The first blood drawn by the A-4 Skyhawks changed everything. It transformed the conflict from a confident advance into a desperate contest of endurance. The British Navy now knew it was fighting an enemy that would not back down, and that every mile closer to the Falklands would be paid for in steel and blood. As the battles intensified, the Skyhawk raids grew bolder and more frequent. The most dangerous phase of the war was still ahead, one that would push both sides beyond anything they had experienced before. The struggle for San Carlos water would become one of the most intense and defining episodes of the Falklands War. For the British, this narrow stretch of water on East Falkland was chosen as the primary landing zone for ground forces. Sheltered by surrounding hills, it offered protection from submarines and rough seas. But what appeared safe on a map would soon earn a grim new name among British sailors: Bomb Alley. It was here that the A-4 Skyhawks would unleash some of their most devastating attacks. On May 21, 1982, British amphibious forces began landing troops at San Carlos. The operation was massive and complex. Transport ships, landing craft, destroyers, and frigates crowded into the confined waters, unloading men, vehicles, and supplies under constant threat. British commanders knew Argentine air attacks were inevitable, but few anticipated the scale and ferocity that would follow. As dawn broke, Argentine radar stations detected the British landings. Almost immediately, Skyhawk squadrons were scrambled from mainland bases. The pilots faced a daunting flight, hundreds of kilometers over open ocean, refueling en route, navigating with minimal instruments, and then diving straight into one of the most heavily defended zones in the South Atlantic. Turning back was not an option. The landings had to be stopped at any cost. Wave after wave of A-4 Skyhawks descended on San Carlos. Flying low through valleys and over ridgelines, they used the surrounding terrain to mask their approach. British radar systems struggled to track aircraft appearing suddenly from behind hills. The first warning often came from visual sightings: dark shapes racing toward the fleet at terrifying speed. British ships reacted instantly. Missiles launched skyward. Anti-aircraft guns thundered nonstop. Smoke filled the air as ships attempted to conceal themselves. The noise was deafening, the chaos overwhelming. Yet despite the intensity of the defenses, Skyhawks broke through again and again. Bombs struck transport ships loaded with troops and supplies. Explosions ripped through decks, starting fires that threatened to engulf entire vessels. In some cases, bombs penetrated deep into hulls before detonating or failing to detonate, causing massive internal damage. Damage control teams fought desperately, often in smoke-filled compartments, knowing that another attack could arrive at any moment. One British ship after another was hit. Some were crippled. Others were set ablaze and later abandoned. The narrow waters of San Carlos left little room to maneuver, making ships vulnerable and escape nearly impossible. Every successful Argentine attack intensified the sense of danger. The landing zone had become a battlefield in its own right. For the Skyhawk pilots, San Carlos was a nightmare. British defenses were concentrated and relentless. Ships fired continuously, creating walls of flak through which the attackers had to fly. Many Skyhawks were hit during their attack runs, exploding in midair or crashing into the sea. Pilots pressed on even as their aircraft took damage, focusing on releasing their bombs before losing control. The courage displayed on both sides was extraordinary. British sailors stood at their guns for hours, exhausted yet alert, knowing that a single missed target could mean catastrophe. Argentine pilots flew into near certain death, fully aware that their chances of survival were slim. San Carlos became a test of human endurance as much as military capability. Despite suffering heavy losses, the Argentine attacks achieved strategic results. They slowed the British advance, forced ships to withdraw temporarily, and inflicted damage that would haunt the task force for the rest of the campaign. Every destroyed or damaged ship reduced the British Navy's ability to support troops ashore. The Skyhawks had not stopped the landings, but they had made them painfully costly. British commanders were forced to adapt quickly. Ships altered positions, spreading out to reduce vulnerability. Air patrols were intensified, and coordination between ships improved. Even so, the geography of San Carlos favored the attackers. Hills and narrow channels continued to limit detection and reaction time. The Skyhawks exploited every weakness. By the end of the San Carlos battles, the cost was clear. British losses were significant, both in ships and personnel. Argentine losses were devastating, particularly among the pilots who flew repeated missions into the same deadly defenses. Yet in purely strategic terms, the Skyhawks had achieved something remarkable. They had challenged a modern amphibious operation with limited resources and nearly stopped it through sheer determination. San Carlos Water would be remembered as the moment when the A-4 Skyhawk proved beyond doubt that it was the most dangerous threat faced by the British Navy during the war. The landing zone survived, but at a price that stunned naval planners around the world. As the conflict moved forward, the British fleet remained under constant pressure. The Skyhawks were not finished. Their most dramatic and costly strikes were still to come. The Falklands War was a conflict that demanded the ultimate sacrifice from all involved, and the Skyhawk raids were no exception. For the Argentine pilots who flew these small, aging jets, every sortie was a gamble with life itself. Many would never return, yet their actions left a legacy that would echo far beyond the South Atlantic. Each attack carried a heavy toll, both in aircraft and human lives, underscoring the brutal reality of modern naval warfare. Throughout the campaign, the attrition rate among Skyhawk pilots was staggering. Missions were planned meticulously, but precision could never guarantee survival. The combination of long overwater flights, minimal onboard navigation equipment, and heavily defended targets created near impossible conditions. Some pilots vanished over the ocean, their fates unknown. Others were shot down by sea harriers or shipboard anti-aircraft fire. Each loss was felt acutely, not only within their squadrons, but across the Argentine military, which struggled to replace experienced airmen in a short, intense war. Yet for all the danger, the Skyhawk pilots achieved feats that seemed improbable. They struck with remarkable accuracy, often hitting moving warships with unguided bombs at high speeds. Even when bombs failed to detonate, their impact caused structural damage, flooding, and fires that challenged damage control teams. The psychological effect on British sailors was profound. Knowing that the attacks could come at any time from seemingly invisible aircraft added a layer of terror to every day at sea. The human stories behind these attacks were as gripping as the combat itself. Pilots faced the constant threat of death, yet displayed unwavering courage. Some flew multiple sorties in a single day, knowing each mission could be their last. Their families, thousands of kilometers away, lived in anxiety, often learning of their fate long after the battle had ended. These men became both heroes and martyrs, celebrated in Argentina for their daring, but forever marked by the sacrifices they made. The losses were not limited to Argentine forces. British sailors and officers also faced severe trials. Ships were hit, men were killed, and the task force had to operate under continuous stress. Damage control became a daily test of endurance and skill. Every engagement demanded split-second decisions under the weight of fear and fatigue. While technology provided some protection, it could not prevent the chaos of unexpected, low-level attacks that exploited every vulnerability. Among the legends of the Skyhawk raids were specific missions that have entered military history. Pilots who managed to penetrate the most heavily defended sectors, strike multiple targets, and return despite severe damage, became symbols of tactical ingenuity and bravery. These individuals demonstrated that courage and skill could, in certain circumstances, compensate for technological inferiority. Their actions would be studied in military academies for decades as examples of asymmetric warfare, where small, determined forces confront more powerful adversaries and achieve disproportionate effects. The strategic impact of these raids extended beyond immediate destruction. Each attack forced the British Navy to adapt constantly, reallocating resources to counter a threat that was both persistent and unpredictable. Ships had to adjust formations, anti-aircraft defenses were recalibrated, and carrier-based fighter patrols were stretched thin. Every successful Skyhawk strike created operational dilemmas that consumed both attention and energy, shaping the tempo and conduct of the entire campaign. Moreover, the raids left a psychological scar that lingered long after individual bombs had exploded. The knowledge that a small, agile aircraft could penetrate the most advanced defenses challenged assumptions about naval invulnerability. British commanders, engineers, and planners were forced to confront the limits of technology in the face of human ingenuity and bravery. The Skyhawk raids demonstrated that warfare was not solely a contest of machines. It was a test of human courage, creativity, and resilience under fire. In the final analysis, the cost of the Skyhawk raids was measured in multiple dimensions: aircraft destroyed, pilots lost, ships damaged, and the psychological toll on both sides. But it was also measured in legend and legacy. Argentine Skyhawk pilots became national heroes, their daring missions celebrated as a testament to skill and determination against overwhelming odds. For the British, the raids were a sobering lesson, a reminder that even the most advanced navy could be challenged and that technological superiority alone could never guarantee absolute safety. The story of the Skyhawk raids is not simply one of destruction and loss. It is a story of human endurance, tactical brilliance, and the extraordinary interplay between courage and adversity. It captures the essence of what makes warfare unpredictable and compelling. In this context, the A-4 Skyhawk emerges not just as an aircraft, but as a symbol of audacity and sacrifice, capable of changing the course of a conflict despite its limitations. As the Falklands War progressed beyond San Carlos, the lessons of these early Skyhawk attacks continued to resonate. The pilots who survived carried the scars, both physical and emotional, while the naval forces adjusted strategies to minimize further losses. Yet the memory of those daring raids remained vivid, a constant reminder of what could be achieved when skill, courage, and determination converge, even in the most hostile and unforgiving environments.